Bless his heart.
I think he's backsliding.
I think I saw him drink.
Yeah, but in moderation.
I just wasn't seeing much fruit.
He's going down a slippery slope.
How's your heart, man?
How's your heart?
I'm just such a words guy.
It was a total God thing. I'm blessed. Been working on my testimony.
Is that secular music?
We're opening with a secular song tonight.
Wait, is this a secular song?
Isn't she secular?
Which station's The Fish? 104.3 The Fish.
Safe for the whole family. Dude, he brought it.
He brought the word. That service last night rocked me.
They're pretty purpose-driven.
Yeah, it's Seeker. Don't they do Seeker service there?
I feel like he's gotten really watered down.
I don't feel like he really teaches the word.
There's just not enough meat, you know?
Crap.
Shoot. Sheesh.
Frick. Darn it!
Holy crap.
Son of a bee sting.
Not cool. I find that offensive.
Hey, if you're here for the first time and you're not offended yet, there's still 30 minutes left, so don't worry. So we got plenty of time for that still coming. The second thing that was interesting to me, and I just realized this, was that there are probably dozens of churches across the country preaching about the ills of secular music this morning, but we just preached about the ills of Southern gospel music. I think that's a weird one. So I thought that was interesting. I didn't think about that before I did it, and then I thought, well, you know, it is what it is, I guess. Now, the third thing I want you to know about today is that that you are among a group of people who are about to do something unbelievable. This is really great stuff. Since the very beginning of our story as a church, we've always had the core piece of kind of our story. Every fall, we've done this Fall Fest. Now, one year we had to cancel it because it rained and our lot was all muddy and it was crazy. But we have had a Fall Fest every year since we started, and it has grown. When we first started, it was just, you know, a couple of jumpers, a dunk tank, and like trunks and candy, and that's it. And every year, like, you know, like, we got to try and one up ourselves. I think at some point we're gonna have to launch someone into orbit, but but things have just gone well. I mean, our first couple of years, we had to tell Mike, like, don't wear masks that bleed, you're freaking the kids out, you know, like, like, it was so much fun to have all this stuff. But now every year it gets a little bit more. I mean, we added something to it, we added something else to it. We went from trunks to jumpers to, you know, to like the next thing was, I can't even remember what else we had. We had a monster truck thing one time, which didn't go off really well. If you were here, the monster truck broke and it didn't go well, but it went well. It was fun. So we had all kinds of stuff. This year, unbelievable stuff. We got the jumpers, we got the dunk tank, we got trunks, 50 trunks full of candy for kids to get. Last year we called them pumpkin chucking because we had pictures of Chuck, our youth pastor, out in the field, and you got to take, you know, pumpkins and shoot them with like water balloon launchers out at Chuck, pictures of Chuck out on the run. This year we did pictures of Bryce. And so we call it Bryce Blasters, okay? So you can go out there and blast pumpkins at Bryce. Then we did these caricatures. We got them done. They look awesome. And like one of them, I didn't even know this was possible because I cannot explain the way Bryce's judgy eyes look, okay? But they captured him perfectly. I will be aiming at that one, okay? Like he always gets his judgy eyes on when I, like, you know, say something stupid. He's always like, really? That's what you had? So we get this. So we got judgy eyes Bryce. We got like freaking out Bryce. We got all kinds of, we got those out there and Bryce blasters. Then we got these like, I think you can see them on there. They got like some awesome like kart races that we're going to do. We've got free hot dogs. We've got a couple of food trucks that are going to be here that are going to be awesome stuff. And we've got some really cool stuff. Plus, this is awesome, to the amazement of every 9, 10-year-old boy and girl, we have Nerf Wars arena. So we have like a paintball arena converted for Nerf. We have 3-on-3, you know, games of we supply all of the Nerf bullets. We supply all of the Nerf guns. And yes, moms, we do all of the cleanup. They're not going to find them underneath the couch at your house. They can get all of their firing out, like right here, or we can get them fired up and send them home. I can't remember which one it is. And then we have 50 cars with trunks that are going to have these. That's awesome. It is an epic, deal. We had probably more than 1,200 people here last year. We weren't sure exactly how many because there's just droves of people and they're everywhere. And you might think, well, what good does it do to have like a big story like that? But here's the deal, man. We had some unbelievable just time together, and we had some unbelievable outreach. I just met a couple of weeks ago that they came for the first time to Journey. They came to the trunk or treat, and we're here for Fall Fest, and they were a part of it. And then every Sunday since then, they've been like, we got to go back to that church. We got to go back to that church. And then they finally started. They didn't fart. They finally started. That sounded like I said they farted, but I'm sure they have because we all do. But like, they finally started. Are we back now? Okay, finally started. See, people didn't laugh at any of my first stuff. This is way better. So they finally started coming to Journey like a month or so ago, and I met them at First Steps, and they're taking their next steps toward Jesus, all because of the influence of Fall Fest. So here's the deal, what I need from you. We have 50 trunks that we need to get. We've got about 20 people signed up or 25 people signed up already. We need you to sign up for a trunk today. Like, all you got to do is take your card out, that little welcome card, mark A. You don't have to be a creative genius. You don't have to be scary. You don't have to be anything. You could throw a picnic blanket in your trunk and say, hey, it's a picnic trunk. I don't care. It does not matter to us what you do. You decorate your trunk. Kids don't even care, because what do they want? Candy. That's all that matters to them. You sign up for a trunk, decorate it with whatever you want, and then you'll get, when to be here and what to do and all that stuff. And then we'll even supply the candy, which leads to my other point, okay? Your section hosts have a little bucket. You'll see it on the ground. It's not a little bucket. It's a big container. And we need you to bring candy, bad. As of this morning, we had 100 pounds of candy. And we probably now, I'm guessing, around 140, 150 pounds of candy. We need 300 pounds of candy. Do you realize what that means? Like, right? So that's like a gigantic bag of candy for every one of us. We need you to go out this week and buy candy. Buy candy. Did I mention buy candy? Go to Sam's Club and buy candy. Do not go to Walmart and buy that little finicky bag of candy, okay? Like, not this little tiny 8 ounces, oh, that'll be cute. If that's all you got money for, that's fine. But if you got money for it, go to Sam's Club, buy that 5-pound bag of candy. Do not go and buy the full-size Snicker bars. We're not trying to be that house, okay? We're not trying to be the cool people who gave out the whole candy. Kids are going to come to Journey. They're going to go through that thing. They're not going to remember it. They're going to have a sack full of garbage candy. The suckers, the dum-dums, all the crappy candy that you don't want to be that house. We want it, right? We want to be that house because we're going to give them like 6 pounds each of candy. So bring candy. Bring candy. Did I mention bring candy? We need you to bring candy. So bring it next week right here. That's your last chance. Next Sunday, if you're not going to be here next Sunday, bring it here and drop it off in the front of the, it's not going to rot. It's nothing but preservatives. So just drop it off, and we would love to give that away. We love Fall Fest, and we need 100 volunteers. We need 300 plus pounds of candy. We need everything you've got. So carve out next weekend. Invite friends, invite family, invite people. It's safe, fun, free. It's going to be awesome. The only thing there's a charge for it all is the food trucks if you want to get some fancy food. But if not, we got free hot dogs. We got all kinds of stuff. So don't forget that. So hey, here's the deal. We've been in a series called Shoot Christians Say, and I'm really proud of myself because I've gotten through all of these weeks of substitute cuss words, and I haven't slipped and cussed. And I am so thankful. That's a big, you guys need to give me a round of applause for that. Because you brought your kids to this family safe environment, and I kept up with it. What a deal. So I still got 1 week left. So let's see what happens. But hey, we've been talking about this for the past several weeks. The idea that Christians say some ridiculous things, We say some stuff that like, it just doesn't make sense, or we say some things that are mean, but the problem is not just those things, that we say things and then we believe them. We believe it's okay. Like, we as Christians leave churches. Like, we'll get to a place where our faith story kind of plateaus, and we'll leave a church, and when people say, well, why'd you leave so-and-so church, or why'd you leave Journey? We'll say, well, I just wasn't being fed. And that's ridiculous, because the point of this whole place is never to feed you. It's not for me to, sit here for half an hour and kind of scrape off a little bit and go, you ready? Here comes the airplane. We're not here to feed you. You're here to encourage you, challenge you by all means. And I hope that you are fed during this 30 minutes. But this is never intended to be all that you eat for the next week. So my hope is that you heard what Chuck had to say that week and you were challenged by it. We talked about other things that Christians say that are just ridiculous. Last week we talked about the idea that we hold up these picket signs that say turn or burn. And we kind of have that tendency in our own hearts to think that what Luke chapter 13 says is really the summary of the gospel, that if we don't turn from our sin, that we'll perish for eternity. And the truth of it is that the Bible does talk about if we don't turn from our sin, that we will spend eternity separated from God in a place the Bible calls hell. But that's not the lead card of the story. That's not the first thing that gets played, because the very truth of the matter is that the gospel is a story of love and redemption and restoration. Condemnation is really only us. God doesn't send anyone to hell. We send ourselves. We choose to not follow him. We choose to walk away. We choose to spend eternity separated from him. The problem is sometimes when we tell people turn or burn and we begin to believe that ourselves, is that we have a tendency to think that it's about us, and it's really not about us. It's about God's story of redemption and wholeness and restoration in our own lives. We talked about that last week. This week I want to talk to you about one that is I see very often. And most of the time, honestly, I see it when people are, he's sitting in my office, or I'm at coffee with a guy, or, or whatever, and we're just talking about some of the tragedies, some of the terribly difficult things that you and I experience. And we all experience them, right? We get to those moments in our life where our relationships have not gone well, our marriage has, kind of gone stagnant, or our finances are a wreck, and you're like, man, I don't know what happened. There's all that kind of like tension around this idea, and we feel this weight on our shoulders. And usually through tears, somebody will share with me and say, man, I know that God will never give me more than I can handle. And to which I listen to him say this, and I listen to him talk about their own story, and I think of my own story. And even though they're crying, I so just want to say, bullshit, like that's crazy that you're absolutely out of your mind, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I commonly get more than I can handle, right? Sometimes life deals a hand that I'm like, I don't know anyone who can handle this. And we get it confused sometimes because we'll have a tendency to think that we think it's scriptural, right? We'll kind of chime back in our head and go, oh, well, there's that one passage of scripture, and somebody told you at some time that says, that says that you'll never be tempted beyond what you can handle. And the God will always, when you're tempted, provide a way out. But what that's talking about is temptation for us to walk away from God, not how much we can handle. I don't know about you, but I routinely get more than I can handle. My life constantly deals me a hand that I just can't take. It's a financial problem that I'm just like, this is more than I can take. A relational stress that's just more than I can take. A problem in life that just is the circumstances, whether it's something I did and it's the consequences of life that are just more than I can handle, or it's something I didn't do, it's something that someone did to me, and it's just more than I can handle. I don't know about you, but I've suffered in places in my life where I've gotten routinely more than I can handle. So the problem is, if I believe that God will never give me more than I can handle, one of two things is the case. Either I have more in me than I think I have in me, or God lied. And the problem is I don't see it in me. So what's the problem? Is it really true that God gives us more than we can handle? I think it is. Because answer this question for me. If God never gave you more than you could handle, then what would you need him for? What would be the value? If you never got more laid on your shoulders, if you never had more relational stress, business stress, financial stress, if you had never had more health issues than you could handle, then what would be your need for God? You wouldn't need him, would you? The truth is that God routinely gives me more than I can handle, but God will never give me more than he can handle. There's a fine difference there, isn't it? God routinely gives me more than I can handle, but he will never give me more than he can handle. I do a fair amount of weddings. And to be honest, Sheila and I both, we love the wedding process. I love the premarital counseling. We don't just do weddings. Like if you just walked up and said, hey, would you do our wedding? We don't just do weddings, We require 4 meetings of premarital counseling, and some of it is, if Sheila's available, we like to do some of those together where, it's just 2 couples, some of us a little further down the road. I used to think we were the young ones in the room, come to find out like now we've been married over 20 years, and And we've been through a lot in that 20 years, a lot of mess, a lot of triumphs, a lot of trials and issues. And it's great to get to share that. And we love that. And there'll come a place in that fourth one and we'll say, let's talk about the ceremony. And so we'll talk about it and we'll say, what do you want to do with this ceremony? What do you want read? What do you want to sing? What do you want to do? All that stuff. And, usually a couple of passages are kind of common. Most of the time people don't really know the references. They're like, well, that one chapter about love, love is patient, love is kind, doesn't envy, it isn't boast, it isn't proud, it's not self-seeking, doesn't keep record of wrongs. You're familiar with this passage because you've been to weddings before, right? But when you read that, you think, oh, isn't that sweet? There's a part of us that goes, man, isn't that beautiful? But then when you read it a little bit deeper, you're like, wait a minute, this isn't about marriage at all, is it? Your love is patient. Yeah, sure it is. Love is kind. It doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it isn't proud, it's not self-seeking, it doesn't keep record. Yeah, sure, right. This obviously isn't about being married to a person, right? I mean, love is kind, unless you're married to me, right? And sometimes I'm just not kind. I don't mean to be mean. It happens, doesn't it? So we have this message of 1 Corinthians chapter 13 that unfolds, and it says that love is kind of the center of all of it. And he says in the passage, and this is what's so important for us, it says in that passage that we hear, if I speak with the tongues of men and angels but don't have love, I am nothing. If he says that I do all these great things in God's name but I don't have love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. You just make noise, right? But then he gets into one thing at the end that is so powerful. Now here's what we're looking for. The question isn't, what does God give me more than we can handle? And it's really not even, does God give me more than he can handle? That sounds cute. But the question is, what do you and I do when we have more than we can handle? And when that moment comes, the thing that we want most, right? When we're overwhelmed, and you've been there, right? You've lost a loved one. That's not a distant loved one where you're a little bit sad, but that one where you're just grief stricken and you just can't even see it, and the whole world seems to be shaped by this loss, and you're just kind of lost in it, and you just feel hopeless. Or that point in your life when you just feel like, I just can't find my way out of this depression, and it just seems to hang on your shoulders and you can't find hope. Isn't that what we want? And here's the thing that's so important. That passage sounds like it's all about love, but it really hinges on hope. Look at the last verse in this passage. He says this, at the end of all of that passage, love is patient and kind, doesn't envy, doesn't boast, it isn't proud, it's not self-seeking, doesn't keep record of wrongs. It goes through this whole litany of characteristics of love. He says this at the end, that 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. Now, we have always heard that passage and kind of gravitated toward love because we know it's powerful. But understand something, hope is critical in this. And when we want for hope in those dark hours of our lives, when we're going through those difficult, terribly difficult times, what God promises us is that there is hope, and that our hope it's not plastic or cheap, right? It's not something that just kind of go, oh, that feels better. It's not something that just gives us a little pick me up, right? Our hope, we want hope deeply. It's the reason that we check our phones literally on average 85 times a day. Some of you are like, man, they were only watching half the day. It's the reason we do that, because every time that little ding goes off or that buzz happens, it gives you just a little bump of dopamine. Your mind just goes, oh, that's cool. Somebody wants to talk to me. What it sounds like or feels like to us emotionally is good news, because we're hardwired to want hope. Ecclesiastes says that God has sown in, or he's hardwired, or he's set in our hearts eternity. We want things that are substantive and eternal and valuable. And our heart cries out for something valuable, especially when we're hurting. Because when we're going okay, we can kind of grab around for anything to rely on or lean on, right? But when we're hurting, when we're in that moment of despair and we feel hopeless, we need something eternal, something substantive to lean on. I love how John Eldredge puts this. He says that a life without faith has no meaning. A life without love isn't worth living. A life without hope is a dark cavern from which we cannot escape. A life without faith has no meaning. A life without love isn't worth living. A life without hope is a dark cavern from which we cannot escape. Have you ever felt hopeless? In the middle of despair, in the middle of our own mess, in the middle of our problems, have you ever felt hopeless? Ever felt like your marriage was hopeless? Like your finances were hopeless? Like your relationships were hopeless? You ever felt like the story of your life was hopeless? You ever felt ultimately hopeless? Yes, we all have, because it's the enemy's effort to put a blanket over that little ray of hope in our darkest hour. There are three things that last forever: faith, hope, and love. While love is by all means the greatest of them, hope is the key to experiencing all of it. It's the enemy's effort to blot out any ray of hope in our lives, and he wants nothing more than to make us hopeless and worthless. In fact, he does it all the time. When we experience tragedy, we always ask, where's God in this? Because why? Because we want hope. When we see a tragedy happen on the news and in life around us, we want to know quickly, where is hope in this story? Where is God in this? Like a couple weeks ago, a few weeks back, when all the tragedy happened in Las Vegas. And we're looking at the story, right? We're watching it on TV. And the quick question came back to mind, the same one that we'd had in our mind on 9/11 and countless tragedies since then. Where's God in this? Where's God in this terrible thing, you know? There's really kind of four basic explanations of where we think God is in that. You know, and it's not really where we think, it's where people offer that God is in this. Some people see God as the cause of it. You know, they kind of look at it and think, well, God's over there somewhere, and, you know, he's really the God who sees something terrible, and he's like, I don't like that, and he judges it, right? And we have a tendency to hear that. I mean, as Christians, especially those of us who think our stuff doesn't stink, you know, we have a tendency to go, well, those people were doing something wrong, and that was God's judgment on them. Well, that's all well and good until you have to open the Bible. Like, you know, until you have to look at things and go, man, we're all deserving of that same judgment. God isn't the cause of those terrible things. And another way that we often see it is that God's the gatekeeper. That God's, you know, that this guy said, what are you here for today? You know, what do you want to do? Well, I want to get this long-range rifles and I want to shoot this crowd. People, well, I guess so. Go ahead. You know, that God's just, and you're going, how could a loving God do that? That's how people have a tendency to think that God is the gatekeeper in the deal. I mean, somehow he allows this terrible kind of thing. Just kind of because some things get allowed and some things don't. And then we kind of console ourselves, well, God's got a plan and I don't understand it. Yeah, you're right, I don't understand it. That's a lousy plan. I don't get it. Like, I don't understand how that is supposed to help anything. It doesn't make sense, you know? Or a terrible tragedy or a loss of a child. When I see a child-sized casket, don't tell me that God's in the back going, well, I allowed that one. You got to let some bad things and good things happen. It all comes out in the end. Yeah, unless that's your kid. So where's God? If he's not the cause and he's not the gatekeeper, then maybe he's just a bystander. Just kind of watching it. He wind the whole thing up and kind of let it go. And it's just kind of spinning out of control, you know? There's that tendency sometimes to think that's how God acts, isn't it? That he wound the whole world up and sets it out there like those chattering teeth, you know, that just go on forever. And you just kind of go, oh, that stinks. I hate that. Oh, wow, I bumped into that, you know? That God's just a bystander out watching it from the outside. It's ridiculous, really. When tragedy happens, I think we've got to understand something. That God allows us to have our own free choice, own free will. We get to do whatever we choose to do, even if that's broken. And God loves us and even those who perpetrate tragedies like that. God loves us and even those who perpetrate tragedies enough to not force his will on us. Because if he forced his will on them, he'd have to force his will on me. He'd have to force me to behave, force me to love him. And I don't generally respond well to being forced. God gives us free will. We choose to walk away. We choose to do terrible things. But here's the way I choose to see it, is that God isn't the cause. He's not the gatekeeper. He's not a bystander. He's the ultimate opportunist. He takes those terrible things that we experience, right? The things that we did and they cause us terrible tragedy, or the things that someone else does, or just the result of being in this world. He takes these terrible tragedies and he chooses to leverage them to teach our hearts. And that's really what you need to rest on. I mean, where you're at and where we're at in our difficult, dark hour of our lives, right? When we're experiencing the worst of the worst of the worst, right? We need to understand that God leverages that terrible tragedy in our life to teach us something. God leverages our addiction. God leverages our troubled marriage. God leverages our finances. God leverages our tragedies to teach our hearts. So lean in during those difficult times and teach our hearts in the middle of our tragedy. We've got this terrible weight of finances on our life. And so we're like, I don't know, I can't stay under the darkness one more minute. So we're going to go away. And we'll just put it all on a credit card and we'll come back and it'll be, but the problem is all that's better there when we get back, right? It's not any better. Or we feel overwhelmed by stuff and we're like, you know what? I just want to numb it all. So I'm just going to drink too much or smoke this or do that. I'm just going to do that because I just want to escape it for a minute. And the problem is we escape it for a minute, but then we come back and it's still there, isn't it? Or we have relational trouble and it's weighing on us and it feels hopeless and dark and everything else. And everything in us goes, hey, you know what? There's hope if you just find somebody else. But the problem is that's not really hope, is it? That's all fake. Whether it's a cruise or a bottle or a person, it's all fake. It's nothing like hope, but God wants to leverage those difficult times to tell us an amazing story of hope. Look at what Romans chapter 5 has to say. He says this about tragedy. He says, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings. Now, that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, if you weren't in church, would that even make sense if somebody said, oh, I love suffering? You'd be like, you're a sadist, right? Like, that's not cool, right? There's clinics for that sort of thing, right? I mean, like, if you're really into getting hurt, that doesn't make sense, does it? There's a broken part of that, but what he's saying is that we glory in our suffering because, look at what he says. He says, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, what are we looking for? Hope. Because our suffering produces perseverance. Our perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. That's what we've been looking for the whole time. That's why we wanted to run on a cruise. That's why we wanted to grab a bottle. That's why we wanted to find another person, because we want some ray of hope that tells us everything's going to be okay. Whether we find an escape or numb the pain or find another person, we want to feel like there's hope at the end of the tunnel, right? We want to feel like there's hope in the darkness. And what Paul is telling us is that if we lean into our pain rather than run away from it, that our suffering brings about perseverance. Our perseverance brings about character, and our character brings about the hope. God wants to leverage our sufferings to teach our hearts. And look what he says. And hope doesn't put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out in our hearts and through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. This is powerful stuff. God's saying, I want to offer you hope about what's going on in the future. Look at the way the Message paraphrases. It takes the same thing and kind of paraphrases it in today's language, because those last sentence or so can be a little bit difficult to get. He says this, there's more to come. I love how he puts this. We continue to shout our praise even though we're hemmed in by troubles, because we know how troubles can develop passionate patience, perseverance, right? Troubles can develop our perseverance, our passionate patience in us, and how that patience forges the tempered steel of virtue, character. It gives us that tempered steel of virtue, and look at what it says, keeping us alert for whatever God will do next. That's hope. Keeping us alert, looking for what God will do next. Are you in a terrible place in your life, or do you know someone who is? Because the reality is we're either coming out of one, going into one, or about to go into one. There are troubles around the corner. The question is, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to lean into them or try to find an escape? Are you going to lean into that financial trouble and ask God what he's trying to teach you? Or are you going to run away on a cruise? Are you going to lean into that difficult relational struggle and ask God what he's trying to teach you and you about your heart and you about your brokenness? Or are you going to run from it and find another person? Because the truth is, God will leverage our tragedy to teach our hearts if we'll let him. That's really the question. Listen, we experience these same things. You know, there's a tendency to think, well, he's the pastor. He doesn't really get this stuff, right? He doesn't really experience the same things that we experience. I get that stuff all the time. When I talk about things I've struggled with or struggle with, people go, I didn't know that you struggled that way. I didn't realize it was you. People always have a tendency to think that they're the only ones who struggle because we think everybody else has got it all together. You know, I mean, Sheila and I have been married for 21 years. There's been some really great days, some really bad days. We love each other. And it's tough. Marriages work. There's been some tough times financially. I mean, we've been in ministry for all those years. Some days where we're like, oh, things are going great. And some days where things are not going great. You know, and over those years, we've had opportunities to win, opportunities to try to win. We've had opportunities to do well, and we've had opportunities to fail. And in those times of tragedy, God has taught us over and over and over again that he leverages our difficult things, the trouble that we go through in life, to teach our hearts, to lean into him because he wants to tell us something about our character, help develop perseverance, and ultimately knowing that those difficult times, he gives us hope. About a year ago, our family, part of our church family experienced a significant trial and issue. And Don and Carol Nelson have been a part of Journey for a long time now. I baptized them. I love their family. They're very close to us. About a year ago, Carol was diagnosed with cancer. And her story has been both one of darkness and of hope, perseverance, character, patience, and hope. Listen to her story.
On February 8th, 2017, my life turned upside down. I went to the hospital to have a colonoscopy, and when the results came back, I heard the words that no one wants to hear. You have cancer. It was like time stood still, and my husband and I were in shock. We were just hoping this was all a bad dream. I remember we came home and just pretty much cried and held each other that day, trying to wrap our minds around what we just learned. You know, how was I going to get through this? How was I going to tell my children and my family? This was not on my bucket list, and I knew right away that I couldn't go through this relying on my own strength. I was going to have to turn to God to help me make it through. That evening, my sweet neighbors and a couple of friends came over to the house, and they prayed the sweetest prayers over me. And that night, I decided to give my cancer to God and to glorify him through this journey. And his peace just consumed my body like I've never experienced. It was like God was showing me right away that I wasn't going to handle this. He was. A month later, I had a colon resection and 26 lymph nodes were removed. And as a result of the surgery, we found out that I had stage 3 colorectal cancer and would need a combination of radiation and chemotherapy. So from April to October, I went through these treatments and experienced some of the hardest physical and emotional pain in my life. when the dark moments would hit me, fear and doubt would start to consume me. And my husband had to remind me over and over that those feelings weren't from God and that I needed to focus on one day at a time. As I began trying to lean more into God's power for me, He revealed Himself to me over and over again. Scriptures that I had read before took on a whole new meaning. The church reached out to me and other Christian friends, and they just started sharing God's love to me through prayer and kind acts that they would do for me. And knowing hundreds of people were praying for me, even people I didn't even know, was just the most humbling experience. I would receive random texts or cards or messages from people at just the right time that I needed the most. And then there was music, and music really speaks to my heart. And every day as I drove to work, God would give me a new song. And there was one song that I heard right after I was diagnosed. The name of it was Jesus, Just Say Jesus by Seventh Time Down. And I felt like that song helped me turn towards Jesus when my pain and fear were at their worst. And when that band came to Journey back in June and performed that song, it was like, wow, it was like a wow God moment for me. And it was like God had just sent them to sing that song over me. But there was one very specific time that God showed me that He was in control. And of all things, He used a horsefly to teach me that lesson. I was here at home alone, and I was in severe pain that I just couldn't get a break from, and I was battling just the darkest days that I had been. And I looked up, and there was a horsefly high on the wall, and I began frantically searching for wasp spray to kill it, and I couldn't find it. And in my pain, I just cried out to God to take care of that nasty pest. And when I came back into the house, I couldn't find it anywhere. And when I worked up the nerve the next morning to come out and to the kitchen, I came to that spot and I looked on the floor, and there it was, dead. And I truly believe God killed that bug the minute I asked. And I just started crying and praising and thanking God, because I knew that if He could kill a stupid bug for me, how much more could He take care of all my needs, including my pain and my cancer. And as crazy as that story sounds, it's stuck with me that God cares about me and He's always with me. And I don't have the strength to go through this cancer on my own. Every day I'm reminded that this is harder than what I can handle. But God's faithful love hasn't dried up on me. Cancer might have been more than I could handle, but it's never been more than what He could handle. And that's why my confidence is in God, because He started something in me, and I know He's going to see me through to the end.
And I hope in Carol's story you see a few things. I hope you see that your story, no matter how it's written, whether it is a story of unbalanced faith or fear and insecurity or triumph or trial or issues, your story is not only safe here, but it's valuable and important here. Second thing I hope you see in that is that the story of what's behind us helps us see the future of what God's going to do for us. It's really that same story over and over again. She sees what God's done for us in the past and has faith that He'll do what He needs to do in the future. God will play it out in a way that ultimately leverages those things to teach us what we need. Silly fear of a horsefly. And we feel like God would maybe go, oh, come on, get over it. It's just a horsefly, right? But God doesn't know. I care about your needs. I care about your needs no matter what they are. And the great part about that story, she comes back in and, just kind of locks herself in the room. The next day comes out and says the last place she saw it when she went and prayed, and then it drops dead on the floor. God does amazing things. It just shows us again and again and again the words of Romans chapter 5 are really the case for us. Let's look at them again. There's more to come. There's more to come. There's like the darkness that weighs on our shoulders, the weight that's on our shoulders, all that stuff that's there. There's more to come. The story of addiction, the story of despair, the story of all that mess behind you, there's more to come. Rest in that. Know that there's more to come. What is the future, right? It is this. We continue to shout our praise even when we're hemmed in by trials, because we know that we can, through those trials, we can develop passionate patience in us. That God develops passionate patience in us, and how that patience forges to the tempered steel of virtue, that confidence, that character that he's forging in us. And through that, keeping us alert for what God will do next. The bottom line, I mean, if you walk out of here with nothing else, walk out of here with simply this. Yesterday's story of faith gives me hope for tomorrow's story of love. That passage, that chapter, the end of chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians says that there are three things that remain: faith, hope, and love. That the greatest of these is love. Yesterday's story of faith gives me hope for tomorrow's story of God's love for my life. He's done it before, and he'll do it again. He's done it before, and he'll do it again. Let's stand and sing together.